I think it's more about let's extend the ability to have trust minimized interactions with Bitcoin to as many people as possible, because the argument that it might all go downstream to federations might be true, but we should still try to extend the ability to have some form of self-custody to as many people as possible.
You guys, welcome to the pod in Denver.
Thank you.
My first travel pod. How are you guys feeling about Denver? How are you like having a good time? Has the party started for you yet?
Yeah, I love it here. I'm based in Denver, so just everyone comes to me.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. Janus, what are you excited about in Denver?
Yeah, I'm just like excited to work in person. Like we have an office here. We're at the Space, which is like a Bitcoin citadel, kind of like I would say being inspired by Bitcoin Park, but doing it in Denver. So we have our like company office there, and yeah, just excited to work on things in person and talk about kind of some of the research areas people are working on. So yeah, just excited for that stuff.
Shout out to the Space. The Space is like really crushing it right now. I'm actually throwing a party there for Enduro Wednesday that you guys won't be able to make it to, but it's gonna be fun.
I'll pop in.
Yeah, pop in.
If you've got drinks, I'll come after that.
Mezcal, margaritas, you guys, okay. Mexican food.
Say less. I will be there.
Well, I'm super excited and jealous that you get a chance to work at the Space. I feel like the Space is really awesome. Today, well, first I'll really quickly introduce you to the folks who might not know you. You've been on the pod before, Janus, formerly espresso researcher. Is that how you would describe your previous work with espresso?
No, I actually was like the marketing lead at espresso.
Oh, you were?
Believe it or not, yeah. So I was the marketing lead and working at espresso, and like I worked on Zcash before that. So I was really blessed to like work with really, really technical people, and that helped me like learn about rollups and started writing about them. And then that's how I got into like maintaining the Bitcoin Layers site.
And then you met Red because Red discovered your blog basically.
Yeah.
And you were working at Messari?
Yeah, at the time.
Okay. And so then you were like, okay, let's do Messari for Bitcoin.
Not exactly. It was, so before Messari, I was working as a developer, and then I was teaching Solidity. So like Web 2 devs that wanted to get into Web 3, like I'm teaching them, Solidity basics, how to build stuff. But I came in through Ethereum. I didn't really check everything else out. So I was like, I'm going to back up, do a little research arc, learn about everything. In the process, I said I should work on Bitcoin, not Ethereum. And that's when I was covering all this Bitcoin stuff. And I saw Janus building this blog and building out like a research tool. And I'm like, yeah, this is where I need to focus.
Why did you come to Bitcoin? Because you famously, at dinner last night, you told me that smart contracts were actually the thing that got you excited about these assets in the first place. How'd you come to the right side?
Money's really cool, but money was not cool enough for me to say, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to devote my 20s to this. But then once I saw you can do a lot more things than just send money, I'm like, okay, this is it. This is what I want to be doing. And yeah, the time at Messari, I was covering Bitcoin and some like stacks and rootstock stuff. And I saw Ordinals happen. And that it just like all clicked. Like if all of these crypto things, DePIN, DeFi, NFTs, if they could have been built on Bitcoin, they would have. And now that they maybe can be, like everyone's coming back. Like everyone would have built these things on Bitcoin the first time around if they could. Now maybe they can, which is exciting.
Okay, so Ordinals was a turning point for you. What was it about Ordinals that made it click?
I thought Bitcoiners didn't like to degen. I thought they didn't like NFTs. I thought they didn't like all that stuff. And then Ordinals happened, and I'm like, like crunching the numbers on the trading volume, and it's totally blowing Ethereum and Solana out of the water. And I'm like, well, that wasn't true. These people like to degen. Like there is a home for all these.
To be fair, like most of them are Ethereum and Solana degens who came to Bitcoin because everyone wants to degen on Bitcoin.
They were all just low-key Bitcoiners. They just did it on Solana because that was the only place they could do it.
Right.
Once they could do it on Ethereum, on Bitcoin, they're like, yeah, that's where I really want to do it.
Okay, so you're a degen ultimately at heart.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, so we're clear about who you are as a person. But you're also, like you mentioned, a developer and probably a good person. You two are some of the kind of most prolific researchers and analysts in, I would say, like the Bitcoin Season 2, Bitcoin Layer 2 space, however you want to define that.
That's a flattering way to put it.
It's true. It's absolutely true. And so the last time I had Janus on, we talked sort of broadly about the Bitcoin Layer 2 space. We sort of did like a general overview of of Bitcoin layer 2s. But we sort of intentionally didn't cover OPCAT, maybe because Janus also doesn't like to talk about it in public, so we won't harass him too much.
It's like I also think that I can provide like the reason why I think we should talk about it. I think the last episode we did really covered the fact that you probably need to add additional functionality to script to make these two-way pegs, more trust minimized. And I think that's what a lot of the interest is in.
Yeah,
100%. Current state of like how everything works. Yeah.
100%. And so today we're going to get into, a little bit deeper about like what that means, what covenants are. Red, you're going to be my go-to person for all things covenants for dummies for anyone who might be watching this episode.
Let's do our best.
And then we'll kind of get into a little bit deeper about maybe some of the challenges with OPCAT, maybe not, the sort of simple maxi, attack vector, we don't know what's going to happen challenges, but like some of the sort of challenges that one might come to if they are sort of thinking really deeply about these questions as you guys are. So, Red, why don't we start with what the fuck is a covenant? If you were going to define a covenant for folks, how would you explain it to a complete layman?
Add spending conditions to your money.
Add spending conditions to your money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bitcoin money is stateless. You can't make it depend on things that happened before or after, really. Like, it's kind of ephemeral. Be able to carry over, what happened before or what will happen next. Just, it exists in a vacuum. Now your UTXO is connected to the past and future.
Makes sense. Conditions for spending, conditional spends, conditional transactions. Can you give some examples of what those conditions might be? Or maybe we could just dive right into, some of the opcode proposals on the table that enable covenants and sort of how they execute those spending conditions.
I think it might make more sense if we start with the latter there. Like we start with specific versions of covenants or like specific types that are enabled by different opcodes.
Okay, so we're going to probably cover 3 core ones today, I think. OPCAT, CTV, and TXHash.
Yeah, those are the popular ones that are discussed most often.
That's the triumvirate of covenants that people care about right now. Okay, so let's go into the spending conditions enabled by OPCAT, CTV, and TXHash.
Yes. So CTV is the simplest. I'll start there. TXHash is like a superset of CTV, so we'll do that next. And then CAT can go last. CTV is like the most simplistic version of covenants that people want to do. I'm just going to add a spending condition. And then your UTXO is no longer ephemeral. Like it's not just destroyed and new ones created. It's can only be destroyed and new ones created if those new ones, carry some predefined rule from the old one. So like it's no longer in a vacuum, unrelated to the future coins that it is morphed into. You have a specific spend path. Like you have to follow this condition.
Can you give a more specific example of what that condition would be? Like in practice, what is like most likely to be used as a condition?
Yeah. So bridging is a really popular idea. It's, hey, a bunch of people are combining their sats into one UTXO and we kind of like shared own it because it mints us, XBTC on some other chain. Well, if I want to take mine out, there is a condition that, if I'm taking mine out, I can't do whatever I want with the rest of the UTXO because I'm not really the full owner. So the spend condition is like you have to return it to its state and like carry over that logic. So you have to not take everyone else's money. You have to keep it as this shared bridge model.
Okay.
Because otherwise, like if you own a UTXO, if you can satisfy the spending condition, you can do whatever you want with it. And that means you can't really have shared ownership. Because if everyone can do whatever they want with it, then anyone can just rug it.
As a practical matter in the example of bridging, does that mean you have to have a proof, essentially, in order to prove, how much of the value of that UTXO you're able to take back?
Yeah, a proof can be one thing you do, but I think like the simpler way I would put it is just you enforce a rule that you have to like prove that it was valid, and you have to only take out your amount and leave everything else in there. And then the spend condition is the way to take out all the rest of the money is to prove that you burnt the rest of the money on L2.
Are there
So it's like you have to maintain that condition for the next iteration of this UTXO.
Are there any limits to spending conditions with CTV? Like, are there ways that it can be used and other ways that it can't be? Like,
CTV is kind of simplistic in that you're adding like one spending condition. Like it's a bit straightforward. It's not like you can do crazy iterations of that.
But the spending condition could be anything, or is it has to be something like it needs to come from this address, or it needs to have this certain proof like what are there any, I guess, are there any limitations to what can be asked of as a condition, if that makes sense?
The way I understand it is the biggest limiter is you can't put on multiple conditions. You're restricting one spend path.
And anything that can be like mathematically proven can be a condition, essentially. Like you could make up any kind of condition about like what that number should look like, essentially.
Yeah, the simplest way is using things that already exist in Bitcoin, like this address. And, like this wallet can withdraw because they deposited and things like that. But if you get into like a zero knowledge proof, you can represent any logic in that.
This is why we like zero knowledge proofs. Okay, CTV. Okay, so we've covered. So
Can CTV give you state forward carrying spend restrictions? I'm not sure because like don't you need the introspection? Like you need to be like do you need to introspect like the actual like proof and the argument like the Merkle tree of the L2 state to be able to like release spending conditions on the shared UTXO? Like it needs to carry the state forward. Because I don't know if CTV alone can give you that.
CTV carries state forward. When it gets into introspection of a proof, that I know less about.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so we have CTV. Basically, like the TLDR on CTV is that it enables you to execute one single spending condition on a transaction. Fair?
Yeah, you add a spending condition to a UTXO.
Okay, so then let's go to TXHash. So what is TXHash enable?
TXHash is a superset of that. So instead of you have this one way to build a covenant, you just have a lot more flexibility on like how you build your CTV, basically. Like you can parameterize like how you're building these, like a CTV output. It's just like a one-to-many kind of thing.
So
like
that means
a CTV is a specific type of TXHash. Like a CTV covenant would be a specific type, but TXHash you could build it in other ways. It's just a more expressive version.
So does that mean that you could have like multiple spending conditions, or am I not quite getting that right?
To my understanding of it, yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I understand it as just a superset of CTV.
Why would some people want CTV instead of TXHash? Because those people seem to exist.
Yeah, I think the logic there is we know we want this one version of covenants. Let's just do that. Let's not add extra stuff.
People just want the simplest, most like risk moderate thing that they could possibly get, and people think that CTV is that thing. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's more narrow. So we know people want this. Let's just do this. We don't know if there's an appetite for all these other versions. Let's not add that.
Well, there is definitely some appetite for all these other versions.
Yeah,
hence us having this conversation. Yes. But that's sort of like the TLDRs. You're probably going to see more like maxi-ish, more conservative people wanting CTV because it theoretically has the lowest attack vector, being like the most narrow in its expressivity. Is that fair?
Yeah, like generally, I'd say that's who wants it. Some people might say, let's do CTV now and then do TXHash right after we have a little bit of time to learn. And I don't know if those are cautious people. That's just a difference in preference of like, how are we going to add it?
Well, I was going to say later we're going to get into the great script restoration and talk about whether or not we should add these opcodes one at a time or do like a one major ultimate upgrade and be done with it. Okay, so TXHash. So we've covered TXHash and then OPCAT, the most wild, wild west of all.
Yeah, in function, OPCAT is the simplest. You just concatenate two stack elements. But for the sake of a covenant, it's this really end-around way to build what CTV and TXHash do very nicely.
Do very directly.
Yeah, it is a like janky version of how you build a covenant with those other tools. So
it's worse for covenants, but what's the benefit?
Maybe.
Why do people want it if it's worse for covenants?
We don't have covenants yet, so we don't know what people are going to build with them. Maybe that flexibility is a good thing, even if it's a little bit more work up front to actually build the covenant. Maybe the flexibility in how we build it matters.
So it maybe enables more stuff. We don't really know. In theory, it can do a lot of things, but the very specific thing that we know that people want to do, it might not do as well as these other more direct approaches.
Well, I think that's like the big case for looking at CAT potentially with other opcodes and kind of like allowing and combining them. Like the thing that I think most people are interested in like long term for CAT is the ability to essentially verify SNARKs, which are validity proofs that can prove the execution of another execution environment. to update the spending restriction on the UTXO locked in the bridge so it can, permit withdrawals. So that's a fancy way of saying we're able to verify the state of this L2 directly in Bitcoin script within the 4 megabyte block size limit. And we can update the spending conditions to permit withdrawals for users from that L2 in a trust minimized manner. And CAT enables you in a round, like it enables covenants, it enables you in a roundabout way to verify these validity proofs. The reason that's like super interesting is because Bitcoin will never settle on like one proving system to like enshrine. They'll never be like, we're going to do op check stark verify in script, because there's just so many questions around zero knowledge proving systems and all these things. So having something very generalist like CAT that can accomplish that same goal is a really good long-term solution, because it gives you the flexibility to build these types of things while not introducing you're not putting like a SNARK verifier directly in there.
Okay, so this is important, and this is something that I didn't understand before. Tell me if I'm getting this right. So OPCAT not only gives you this like roundabout, like quote unquote janky OPCAT covenant solution, it also theoretically gives you a roundabout way to verify SNARKs.
Not just theoretically.
SNARKs.
SNARKs are also like, when I say SNARKs, I include things like Starks. Starks are like a specific type of SNARK.
They're the only type that I know of that OPCAT can verify. This is
and just for everyone who's listening, this is all just zero knowledge.
I would just put everything into what people generally call zero knowledge proofs.
Okay.
Or validity proofs. Those are the two terms.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Well, sorry, what was that?
So basically, I am like summarizing that OPCAT, I think folks, for me, I'll know, I thought that OPCAT was only useful as the sort of roundabout covenants solution or like alternative, but actually it is also useful in actually verifying proofs.
Yeah,
CAT does two big things, covenants and proof verification.
And we've done
the other covenant ones just do covenants,
and it's been done on testnet. Wei King Chen from L2 Iterative built an implementation of this on testnet and was like verified
for validity proofs.
Validity proofs, yeah.
There have also been on testnet validity proof verifications using BitVM, correct? Or not yet?
No, I think people have done that on mainnet. They've played out like challenge response games
on mainnet.
Yeah, with BitVM, not specific to like a bridge, but maybe to like some like tic-tac-toe game or something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
People have done implementations of that.
Okay. So, because I feel like that's another thing that people keep saying, right? Or that you hear a lot is like, OPCAT's just like a better way of doing BitVM.
It would make it more straightforward. But on the CTV, TXHash, CAT thing, like 4 covenants, the way I tried to explain it to a friend the other day was to like anchor it to something that is like existing real knowledge. So UTXOs are ephemeral. You spend it and it's gone forever, and then you make a new one. And that's how your like assets move. So something else that's ephemeral is he is in my fantasy football league, and every year you get a new team. So your team is ephemeral. Like what you had last year doesn't matter. It doesn't affect what you have next year. Like that's your team unless you do a keeper league. So CTV is like you can keep one player next year. TXHash is like, you can keep a few players, or you can do whatever. Like you choose what keeper model you want. Or I'm going to trade you Saquon Barkley, but you're not allowed to start him when I play you next year.
Okay.
Like, you're not allowed to start him against me.
Okay.
So that would be like the difference of CTV TXHash.
Okay.
CAT is like you can inject your own code to build your own version of this. Like the platform you use is not going to build it for you. Like you can do whatever end around piecing you want to build whatever version of that you want.
CAT is the most wild radical.
Yeah, like you go inject some code, do it yourself.
Okay. So we have CTV, direct, straightforward, execute a spending limit with your transactions. Simple, it's one spending limit, very direct, very straightforward.
Yeah.
TXHash is like, let's get a little bit wild with our CTV. Let's have multiple spending conditions, maybe. Let's like make it a little bit more expressive. And then OPCAT is like the wild, wild west, where you can kind of do a million different things. Yeah. But also it's difficult because you have to build it from scratch. Is that also fair? It's like, it's practically difficult to use if your goal is just to build is just to create spending
Yeah,
limits.
it's not ready to go. You got to do some extra steps.
Extra steps, which create potentially like more opportunities for things to go wrong and like things to get weird. And like it's a little bit less elegant if what you actually want to do is just execute a spending limit.
Yes. But if you get cat and one of those.
Oh, okay. And you think most people are in the like great script? Okay, so then you have, this is probably a good place to like move into this next question. So some people are saying we have to choose an opcode. Let's choose an opcode. Let's only do one. Other people are saying, no. Let's just completely facelift Bitcoin script and introduce like 20 opcodes all in one upgrade and go for it. Which camp are you guys in? Or are you more moderate in the middle?
Try it all. Try it all. See what works.
You're a radical.
Yes.
You're just like a go for it. Great script restoration. Here we go.
Yes.
Okay. Great script restoration. How about you?
Yeah, I try not to have an opinion on it because I'm not like super well versed in any of the opcodes or script itself. But I think the thing that helps inform my opinion, there's like two approaches I take to this is like the current state of like off-chain protocols that like, so Bitcoin like inherently, like how I've explained this to friends is like Bitcoin has made a decision that is going to scale via like layer 2 solutions. And the current solutions that are available are either solutions that you have to use an L1 transaction to like create a lightning channel with a counterparty. You can't kind of get around that. The other options are kind of more trusting like coordinators and centralized operators. And then you have this like third solution, which is like completely custodial. And I kind of look at that in the way of like Lightning, maybe something like a state chain protocol like Spark. And then the third thing is like a Fediment, right? I think you can get into this really interesting world where if you add more expressivity, you're kind of looking at this as like the last upgrade Bitcoin is ever going to do. Because the minute that nation states and sovereign wealth funds start yeeting billions of dollars into like buying and acquiring Bitcoin for like their own like strategic reserves or whatever, then from my understanding of like social consensus, the protocol is just going to be infinitely harder to change. And in the current state of Bitcoin, if that happened today, like what I'm seeing from just, all the L2s and different things I'm reviewing is that everything points towards custodial solutions. So if you're looking at upgrading, like you want to do things as minimal as possible to enable the ability to send BTC or receive BTC in a trust minimized manner off of the L1. That's like the only thing, and improve self-custody, I think are the only kind of two things that really, really matter because we're not going to get everything. So let's focus on the things that can give us those two things.
This is actually a really great point that I haven't thought about, which is this idea that like it will get harder to make changes to Bitcoin over time as adoption, particularly by nation states, increases. And so we actually maybe perhaps have a limited amount of time to make these kinds of changes if we want to make them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We talked about last night, Janusz and Red said, everything is a decision. Leaving the way it is a decision.
There's
upgrading is a decision, right? There's an opportunity cost to like every which way you slice it. And so there will potentially be, consequences as to like not implementing all these new opcodes. Yeah. How do you see the different worlds of where we go, right? How does the world evolve in Bitcoin Landia if we stay the same, we don't introduce any new opcats, versus like full on great script restoration, we get all the opcodes, we're basically just like Ethereum with a 21 million hard cap? What are your thoughts?
So the reason we're discussing covenants and a little bit of proof verification is because those are the two that if you add them, ossification doesn't matter in the future. You can do everything else on a real L2. So like, anything else you need to add later down the road, you can do it somewhere else. Ossification doesn't matter. But in the world that we don't get it, are we just all using custodial BTC? Like is BlackRock the L2 that we all use? Is that where everyone's BTC is? Because then, kind of what's the point? If we do get covenant bridging and OPCAT and things like that, it might be max bearish for Bitcoin layers. So a lot of people don't really care about extending Bitcoin the network. Many people just care about BTC the asset. And they say, I want to do more with BTC the asset. I don't want to hold spot. I want yield. I want to do all these other things. And if that's all you care about or want, and we have covenant bridges, well, if I can build a covenant bridge to this side chain, I can also build a covenant bridge to Solana, and there's already DeFi on Solana, so why wouldn't I go over there?
But you make a really, really good point about BlackRock as well. So, like, perhaps in this sort of Jameson Lop quote again, where it's like everything has a consequence. What's the consequence of not adding new opcodes? The consequence is that we move into a world where, like, custodial L2s, essentially, if you want to call them that, or like custodial scaling solutions are just ubiquitous. And that's basically how people are forced to use Bitcoin.
I mean, the best way to look at is if we don't do anything, nothing changes. We already live in that world.
Fees could go up, and more people will have to use custodial solutions.
It's not even that. Fees go up, and then basically everyone becomes priced out of,
on chain.
Not even on chain, but they're priced out of Lightning. They're priced out of solutions that require like the person themselves to do a settlement transaction to the L1. Basically anything where a user has to indirectly or directly interact with the L1, they're completely frozen out. So they go to solutions that have no incentive to not to essentially steal the Bitcoin. Like an interesting point on for Bitcoin layers is like if all these like Bitcoin layers that exist today built like these fancy like ZK based bridges, there's no like Bitcoin itself doesn't care about these solutions. It's extremely agnostic to L2 succeeding or failing. So like if a Bitcoin bridge ends up acquiring like this large supply, let's say like 5% or whatever of like the total supply, and the network that it's kind of integrated with is just another like proof of stake sidechain, there's nothing stopping the proof of stake sidechain from hard forking and doing a malicious fork to essentially drain the bridge and steal everybody's money. And then the question is like, do we as a Bitcoin community hard fork Bitcoin to reverse that transaction from happening? I don't think that's ever going to happen.
No way.
So I think you also have to think of like, if you get these solutions, still the construction and how you design the bridge to the other layer is really important. But like basically that world exists today and it's not even like alternative consensus protocols. It's literally just like banks.
But it's worse. I mean, it's worse as the fee market, as like demand for Blockstream increases, right? I mean, like ultimately as adoption continues, like this problem actually gets worse.
The scaling need becomes more prominent.
Right. Which means that if we can't push through these opcodes theoretically, then the only other option is custodial solutions.
Well, I think there's another interesting thing is that like there's an argument that if you have, so like the reason like the way to build like the best bridge, right, is actually like people talk about these like blockchains called rollups, right? And the reason rollups are actually interesting is because you can build a really good bridge with rollups. Whereas like, I just mentioned the sidechain situation where the sidechain can essentially rug all the users. Like rollups, they can't do that, which is quite interesting. And if you have things like rollups that are paying like a premium for securities, what they have to essentially do is use Bitcoin as a data availability layer. Or if they want to post their proofs, even posting proofs to the chain, like if it's just a SNARK proof or a Grot16 proof or whatever, like that costs money. So if you're posting proofs or posting all of the state data for the chain on Bitcoin, that actually can incentivize a fee market long term. And that's what a lot of like the rollup people argue, that if we can build these bridges and we have an incentive to use Bitcoin for security, then we'll pay for that security and that'll go downstream to the miners and create a sustainable fee market. That's kind of like an alternative view compared to like what the merge mining people say.
Well, exactly. I was going to say this is something that Michael Casey, who is building Anduro's L2 platform, which is a merge mining, essentially L2 based platform. He talks about this all the time, right? That like, okay, if all the money is going to L2s, how do miners get paid? Subsidies declining. People aren't talking about this enough. We need to be like raising the alarms about how we're going to keep fees high in a world where everyone's money is just on L2s. It's sort of a little bit of a conflict with this other side of the coin, which is fees are going to be so high that no one's going to be able to afford to make transactions on chain.
Yeah.
Where's the truth, right? Like what is actually in your opinion, most likely to happen? There's, fees are so high that no one can afford to make on-chain payments, or, the fee market just is so like bad because everyone's, pushing all their money to layer twos, and so there's no fees for miners.
One thing one of you two said before was I think it was you, Janus, the custodial part, like if we don't change anything, we have what we have now. Mm-hmm. I think we have something worse than what we have now, because then we won't have a block subsidy either.
Yeah.
We'll have the custodial model we have now without a block subsidy. So
yeah, that's true.
I wanted to note, like, it gets worse.
Fair. Yeah.
It gets worse. Okay, so that's the bull case for I guess that's like the bull case for opcodes. The bull case, or I don't know if bull case is the right term, but like the strong argument for just moving forward with this great script restoration situation, or at least getting these covenant opcodes, is there's a chance that there's a limited window of time that we can actually make these upgrades. And if we don't make them, at some point there could potentially be a situation where like on-chain activity is just not affordable and people are just forced to custodial solutions, and BlackRock is just like holding their Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, I don't know if it's like, it depends, right? Because like the solution then becomes for Bitcoin is that we need to, I guess, have everybody buy it so the price goes up, and then like mining it is like we'll do it at a loss because we as a nation hold so much Bitcoin in the strategic Bitcoin reserve.
We need to decentralize.
We need to like make sure it doesn't like break, and like we need to maintain its integrity and its monetary value. I'm not entirely
We'll pay to
sure.
mine at some point
Yeah,
if
we'll
it's
pay to
important
mine.
enough.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing. I think the other thing is like ultimately, right, if there's no long-term fee market, you have to basically do what Peter Todd's saying with tail emissions. I know Peter Todd's like proposed that, I believe.
I'm not familiar with this.
So Monero does it basically like you just have like a scheduled inflation forever.
No more 21 mil.
No more 21 million.
Oh, well, that's the
I don't
worst
like
thing
it.
I've ever heard.
Yeah,
That's a nightmare.
Like that's like I think like I mean it's again I don't know the future, right? Like, and I think if Bitcoin decides like Bitcoin's a social system, and if the arching and overwhelming majority of people who interact with the network decide that we just want to maintain status quo and we want to take a bet on this direction, like that's totally fine, and that's like the social community's decision, and people have the right to like go build their like they have the right to fork and build their own versions, and right, like so that's kind of how I view it. I don't view it as like existential, I guess, in that regard. Because I always think there will be something that will enable the things that we're talking about with like L2s and stuff like that.
Existential is an interesting question, though, right? It's like, yeah, we can self-correct, but it could take 30 years. Like, I could be a dead woman before we've self-corrected from that kind of
I don't know,
mistake.
like, it's like, I know a lot of people, like, because I'm, like, interested in, like, rollups and stuff, and, like, this is going to sound crazy, and I know Ethereum is, like, really fumbling the bag hard right now. But like we have Ethereum and we have things like Celestia, and do they have the same like I guess like monetary premium or monetary like kind of policy as Bitcoin? Are they as distributed as Bitcoin? Are they censorship resistant? I don't think so. But there are other things in the market that exist to where if we can't build these types of solutions on Bitcoin, think other places exist to build them.
Let's just circle back to this like inflation solution, this Peter Todd solution for a second.
I think it was Peter Todd. I don't want to name drop him and be
People have been
incorrect.
talking tail emissions for a while.
Yeah, this is not this is not crazy.
But the idea, right? Just so that like our listeners can understand the theory, right? So in theory, this is the idea is we break the 21 million hard cap, which would require like a hard fork. Like how would that even work?
I don't know. Maybe software. I don't know.
How would you
a
even
soft fork
do
is like
that?
adding new restrictions to the code. So any
Okay.
old node, they'd be fine with a new node putting that through. A hard fork is like, I'm going to break some of the old rules or expand on them.
So you would
such
need a
that
hard fork to
old
break
logic-
the 21 million hard cap.
Sounds like it.
Maybe. I
Based
think you
on
might
your
need a hard
definition
fork,
that
yeah.
you're giving me, I think it would need to be a hard fork. Okay, so and the reason to do that, just so that like people understand, would theoretically be to pay miners so that we don't run out of like fees, or excuse me, we don't run out of block subsidy.
we don't run out of
essentially.
security.
So we don't run out of security budget.
Yep.
But wouldn't that devalue Bitcoin such that miners are going to lose money on just the value of Bitcoin?
No, there's an argument that there's so many like lost, like inaccessible coins that the value would like balance out. And then like if it's scheduled like inflation, right? That's kind of like Monero's argument is like it's scheduled inflation. So I know what the inflation is going to be versus like, fiat money where the government can just devalue it at its own like will at any second. So scheduled inflation, while not perfect and not anti-inflationary, is at least predictable. Now, I'm not advocating for that. I want to be clear. I'm just like saying that
There could be
is.
another
This is
version
the
of that.
idea. This is what they're saying.
I mean, you could do it like I guess like you could do what Ethereum does, where like if fees can kind of make up for you can do crazy like fee.
What we
fee
could
stuff,
also do is Hunter was talking about what do we do with like all the quantum insecure Satoshi coins? Like, do we burn them? Do we like distribute them? Why don't we use them to kick the can down the road and just get a little bit more like fee subsidy for X amount of years? And then we don't change 21 mil. We kick the can. We have more time to figure it out. And there goes the quantum threat of someone accessing those and dumping them on the market. Or it's just a reward for building a quantum computer.
Yeah, well, there's always going to be like, things that coins will go on the market for different reasons, right? I mean, we've dealt with that as a community many, many, many times. So like quantum computing might be one of those reasons, right? Maybe some like
but if you
coins
quantum
from the
compute
past
and
will
you
free
steal
up.
coins, do those go on the market?
Well,
Yes.
that's a separate conversation. Hopefully, Hunter's BIP will get passed, and we'll have quantum-resistant Bitcoin addresses. Wouldn't that be great?
I do want to add really quickly, like, I know that, like, because I think of our backgrounds, right, like, and what we research a lot of the time, and like our research is really driven by like where Bitcoin's being used and where it's being allocated. So like we're pretty agnostic. Like I review things that I don't find interesting just because that's where people are using Bitcoin, and I'm like, okay, I have to look at this. I do want to just clarify that, like, with regards to these discussions around introducing new functionality to script, like they do benefit. Like there are things like, CTV is a part of L-Enhance, which is a proposal to make Lightning better. I know ARC, in a lot of their documentation mentioned CTV as a potential improvement that can add potential improvements to the ARC protocol. Bitcoin staking with Babylon, CTV is specifically mentioned as a way to improve, staking, like the remote staking that Babylon's trying to build. So while I don't really have the answers on how those things can improve it, I do want to clarify that like these additional opcodes they're not just for like rollups. And I think a position where we want to lead the discussion is like how can we soft fork Bitcoin to add functionality for new solutions. It's like, what are the solutions that everyone is proposing, and which of these combination of opcodes or which proposal can aggregate the average the improvements out to everybody, so people have an ability to compete in the free market. Like if rollups are the best solution, they'll win in the free market. If ARC will win, and if there's other solutions, they'll win. So I think that's like a big thing too, is like there's proposals for combining a few of these different opcodes so that can benefit a number of different solutions.
And this is theoretically like the overarching argument for OPCAT, is that it's the most broad, the most expressive, theoretically covers the most ground in terms of what it could possibly do.
In my mind, there are two big things we want right now. It's covenants and proof verification.
Mm-hmm.
CAT does both.
CAT does both. CTV does one. TXHash does one.
One, but a little
one,
better,
but like
maybe,
a little better than the
a
other.
little more expressive.
Okay.
CAT does both, and CAT plays nicely with another opcode if we get another one.
Right. Sounds like you're pro great script restoration. Let's just
don't
throw in all
turn
the
it into
opcodes.
Ethereum's VM, but like throw opmul in there. Like let's do multiplication. Crazy idea.
It's funny. I was going to take this conversation, and okay, let's like assess the alternative argument. Like, why are these opcodes potentially problematic? Why should we just like ossify right now? It sounds like you guys are sort of both in the camp, though, that the problem with ossifying right now is that in practical reality, it seems like there's some likelihood that that's what leads to this custodial layer 2 world, right? I mean, like if we just leave things as they are and ossify and are conservative, that probably leads us to like a much more custodial world is sort of what I'm hearing.
It's I've looked at everything, and that's why, I think we've looked at every like implementation of a two-way peg for side chains, for other alternative blockchains. We've looked at things outside of Lightning. I think ARC's pretty interesting, but if you look at, the idea that we're going to scale through layer 2s, like no one's ever built an over-collateralized distributed trust, like permissionless, where anybody can become a signer, two-way peg. No one's ever done it. There's no proof of stake where the token, like if you steal the Bitcoin, there's no one's ever done in practice like an over collateralized bridge where if the validators steal the Bitcoin in the multisig, they get slash tokens, and that's like deterring them against stealing the money. No one's ever, that's the best you can theoretically do right now. Then you have BitVM, which is has different trade-offs. But if we had the ability to build trust minimized distributed permissionless two-way pegs, we would have built them already. It's been years. And so that's kind of the thing that I guess where my point is in the situation is if you don't, and all the researchers and developers are saying we need more functionality to build better layer 2s. As someone who's researched all the things that claim to be layer 2s, I can at least agree that nothing in the current state meets the definition of what a layer 2 is supposed to be. And I will also say, if you look at all of the projects that have been saying for years that they're going to build these trust minimized two-way pegs, when they ship it, it's not any different. It's actually worse than Liquid. So if we're not building
Hot
things
take.
that are better than Liquid, and we've been working on it for 3 to 4 years and dumping all this money and research into it, then
Liquid
maybe
is custodial though, right? I mean, Liquid is like a federated bridge, right?
everything's federated.
Everything's Everything is really just federated. when you
Everything
just
is
like
federated and permissioned. Everything in production is federated and permissioned. Everything.
hot take. You heard it here. Janus.
So I think that's like to say like
That's the core.
to bring on maybe why I don't disagree with Red, even though I'm trying to, I don't have an opinion, right? I will say that like if people are okay with federations, right, and that's an argument. Like I've talked with people and they say like if you can't use Lightning and you can't use these other types of protocols like collaborative multisigs like ARC, state chains, etc., then yeah, you're going to trust a federation, and that's just how it's going to be. And that's an argument people make, and that's like, you know, we can debate that in court and have arguments and see who wins, but yeah.
The conservative argument is basically like just, yeah, federated bridges are fine, and yeah, we'll deal with a high fee environment when that happens, and oh well.
Maybe, but it's also the fact that like there's no free lunch, right? Like rollups, for example, like I mentioned, is something earlier that provides like really good bridges. Like rollups are going to be really expensive to use. Like if the fee market's really, really high, that cost gets incurred onto the user because you have the rollup network itself has to pay Bitcoin to get its like data into the chain. So just like you would have to like pay really high fees to mint an ordinal, you would have to do the same to get your data from a rollup onto the chain. So if someone says, I want to use a different data system, like let's say a federation to just hold the data instead of manage the bridge, then users have less security. So for cheaper systems and maybe like cheaper transactions, you're not going to use the most secure system. But I think the argument is that, so people will say, well, if it's a federation, then let's just do federations, which I get. But I think it's more about let's extend the ability to have trust minimized interactions with Bitcoin to as many people as possible, because the argument that it might all go downstream to federations might be true, but we should still try to extend the ability to have some form of self-custody to as many people as possible.
But there's undoubtedly getting these new opcodes would extend that much further.
Yeah, it extends it much,
people.
in my opinion.
Yeah.
I would say so, yeah.
To your point of maybe we end up with the same thing, maybe it's still federated. Well, let's try it. Let's find out.
See, but this is the type of talk that Bitcoiners make Bitcoiners crazy. I mean, I think I'm actually now officially converted to, because I'm concerned. You know, I'm concerned of like some of the risks of upgrading Bitcoin in general.
Should we do more fear mongering on if we don't?
I mean, like I feel sufficiently fear-mongered on what happens if we don't get these opcats. Excuse me, these opcats.
We need
these
a lot of
opcodes.
cats.
We need a lot of cats. I feel sufficiently nervous now about what happens. I will say I was much more before this conversation on the side of like just conservatism, I think, about introducing opcodes. But I sort of see this sort of broader point that ultimately if we don't enable more decentralized sort of trustless bridging solutions, if you want to call it that, on with new script, then custodial solutions is just what's going to happen, right? Like that's just like we're all just going to be pushed into like BlackRock's multi-sig one day. Like that feels rational and correct.
Yeah, it's bridging is almost like not the right word to use. It's more generally just scaling. Like let's scale Bitcoin without changing Bitcoin too much. Let's scale Bitcoin by doing it elsewhere. Like do the computation somewhere else where it's cheaper, where it's different in some way, and just verify it with Bitcoin. Those two changes let you do that.
Okay, we're just going to double click on this. How do you define scaling? What does Bitcoin scaling mean?
More throughput or more users being able to use the protocol at once.
Okay. Versus, because I was going to say, this is a word that I feel like it's used as like a catch-all to mean like programmable transaction. You know, it's like everything in Bitcoin season 2 is scaling.
Scaling functionality, like adding new features. But generally just the main thing would be scaling throughput, which like Lightning does that. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of a pain to use self-custodially, so most people don't. And then it's like, why'd we...
Elephant in the room, most Lightning users are custodial.
Yeah. People use what's easy. Like users are predictable. They will use what's easy. They will not use what's ideologically best.
Maybe that's the most important elephant in the room for us to discuss is, do users give a shit about whether or not their Bitcoin is custodial?
And that's it. But maybe then this goes to the ossifier camp. So maybe now I'm switching over in the middle of this podcast.
Great.
Like, I don't know. Cause like Lightning, right? Like I've used it, like I've used like Phoenix before, and like, you know, and I've used like Fedimints, and now I'm trying to like spin up my own like Lightning node and like like with Bitcoin Core and whatever, and do all like the whole self-sovereign thing. I think it's about also giving users like the option to, I think with like Lightning, right? It's like they have an option, right? So I've heard it, people hate Lightning and they're like, oh, it's not really a layer 2. It's not like, because people can't use it. And in practice, it's custodial. I think the flip side of that is like 2 blockchains are trying to really scale with layer 2s right now. You have Ethereum and you have Bitcoin. And in Ethereum, you have like a few like pretty small like application specific chains that are trust minimized in the sense that no one can steal all the money. But everything that's like general purpose and is in production, there is immediate upgrade function like mechanisms for everything where a group of people can steal all of the money in the system. And Lightning, on the other hand, is a distributed trust minimized in the sense that you can use it properly. L2 that exists today isn't in production.
It's trustless, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
trustless,
if you're
trust minimized.
using
Yeah.
it if you're using it in a non-custodial way,
self-sovereign
it is
way, yeah.
100%
Absolutely.
trustless.
So is it better to have the ability to like have, L2s that we've never built before and might not, get to that state of like trust minimization because of complexities with them, like what we're seeing in Ethereum? Granted, I think Ethereum will get fully trust minimized L2s within probably the next couple. I think they'll be able to solve a lot of the problems that they have. I just think they're really hard problems. But I think there is a counterpoint to all of this to say that there is an L2 that exists today. People can use it in a self-sovereign way, and people choose to not to, but they still have that option. Then the argument against that is like, well, let's just get rid of the ability to have to like manage channels and do all that stuff and like have to like,
Well, and the real
do all that
argument
stuff.
against Lightning, in my opinion, or like the thing that I most hear as the criticism of Lightning isn't like its L2-ishness or its L2 features. It's just such that like you can't really do like DeFi. You can't do lending. You can't do like there's
only scales throughput
It's a
and not
very
functionality.
specific use case,
Yeah.
which is payments, which some people, like that's their only thing that they care about. But I think the majority of folks who are interested in building out these L2s are interested in use cases outside of payments is sort of my observation.
Yeah.
Anecdotally.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The necessity for an L1 transaction to onboard to Lightning is like another concern I hear.
But that's the case with all.
No. I mean, it's so
It
here's
is, right?
Here's an interesting point, right? So let's say you onboard and it's like a roll up, right? So it's a completely trust minimized. We're hand waving all the way. We've got CAT. We have check
You
Groth
go
16
from
verify,
Coinbase to this roll up,
and we have all the fancy
straight from there.
And what you can do
because
is
you can enter in from the top layer, basically.
so.
and maintain and enter into a self-custodial asset.
But here's the difference. Like, so here's a really good caveat, right? Like, if I send you money on a roll up, you're going to receive that within 5 seconds. You're trusting that the roll up like block builders aren't going to reorg that transaction and revert it within like a certain time frame, right? Because the roll up eventually, the roll up nodes will like come to settlement based on like the data that sequencer posts to Bitcoin. So you kind of have to wait until the roll-up nodes like come to settlement on that transaction, and then maybe you want to also wait for like the finalization of the bridge, which means you have to wait till like the proof is sent to Bitcoin.
Okay.
So there's an argument that like it has the same trust assumption of like state chains in the sense that you trust the state chain operator to not double spend you, but the difference with roll-ups is that we can provably like assert on Bitcoin that the roll-up has finalized because the proof has been posted to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So we
It's a different finality.
It's a different finality guarantee in the sense of state chains. You kind of are always trusting the operator to not revert that transaction and ensuring that you have like ownership. And I guess that's kind of the same with any protocol that has a coordinator. But in things like rollups, and I would also say things like Arc also have this. I think in the sense that you can like settle your newfound ownership of like off-chain UTXOs on-chain with Arc.
Yeah.
You have that like guarantee on Bitcoin that no one's going to reorg your transaction.
You are unsafe up until the finality point. On rollups, that's like every new block. Lightning's not a blockchain. So it's kind of when you close your channel is when the finality risk is gone. Because up until then, I mean, you got to make sure someone doesn't submit old state. You need Watchtower checking that. If you're using a state chain, or if you're using an ARC model, you need to wait for a new round and you need to opt into that round for the finality safety.
Can Lightning channel managers, node runners, I guess, can they submit old states back to L1?
That's the risk. If I sent you, I sold you something, I gave you a bunch of BTC and you gave me the product, and then I just try to close the channel and I submit our state from 10 minutes ago. You would want a Watchtower to come in and say, no, that's not the most recent state. He can't do that. which is why it's self-custodial. You could stop me from doing that. You need to be online or you need a watchtower. Like that finality risk exists until you timestamp on L1, this happened.
How do you stop someone from doing that? So when you say like a watchtower,
A watchtower is like, I come in there and I can prove that this new state is newer than the one you submitted. So, you can prove you have a newer state and say, no, don't close the channel on that old state. I can prove more stuff happened since then.
Do you get a warning like that? And just like for anyone who, again, I am only recently just like super abreast on how Lightning actually works under the hood. But basically you're like swapping back and forth these like pre-signed transactions that are sort of like updating the state on the Lightning channel. And that at any point somebody can just pull down the most recent state to exit the channel if they want to permissionlessly.
Or you could pull old state.
Or you could pull this is news to me. I was under the impression that I must have thought, oh well, they must become void, or like there's like some way that you could like prevent that from happening.
It becomes void by being vigilant or having a watchtower say, I've got something newer. They signed it. Here, look, you can tell. I have their signature on something newer. We both agreed that it happened. That one's old. Don't look at that.
So does a watchtower basically like alert you every time somebody tries to exit a Lightning channel?
It's like an optimistic model, kind of like how like fraud proofs work. Like it's an optimistic model. Like we trust everyone's going to play nice, but if someone tries to be malicious, we can prove that they're wrong.
But do you get a warning? Like, do you get enough time? Like if you just submit a transaction,
you get time to post your like rebuttal. But watchtowers generally do that. It's what it sounds like. It is a watchtower. Like it is, you would like it to be autonomous, like looking at your Lightning channel, is anyone trying to close it on L1?
Okay, I'm going to have to bring Nifty Nate back on for us to discuss this.
She can explain it way better than I can.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but really quickly, I do think that this is an important point because this is something that you have brought up multiple times to me, which is that, Lightning channels, you have to constantly be, making these on-chain transactions. But in my mind, I think, well, don't I have to make an on-chain transaction every time I want to put spot Bitcoin into an L2 multisig?
So the difference is like if you have something that can like update the state of let's say there's one Bitcoin and it's distributed across 10 people. If you have a mechanism to update that state directly in script based on the data that this off-chain system is posting to Bitcoin, I can just send it you directly on the L2, and then the L1 kind of like bridge model will then update and say, oh, now you're the owner of this percentage of the one Bitcoin locked in the bridge instead of me. So if I own 0.1 and I send you 0.05 and we now own it, once the state updates, that bridge then will reflect the state of the L2, and you can just receive it directly on the L2 and not have to make an L1 transaction.
That makes
transaction.
Sense. Yeah. Okay, so basically the way that you avoid having to make an L1 transaction is you just receive your funds on the L2 to begin with. Mm-hmm. This brings up, I think, another key issue with rollups, Bitcoin layer 2s generally, that we spoke about last night, which is liquidity management for the peg, right? Liquidity management for the bridge. If everyone's getting paid on the L2, what does that mean in terms of managing the funds in the multisig to settle back to L1? Do these validators or node operators or bridge operators need to be like constantly putting in more spot Bitcoin, putting up more money to account for the fact that there's all this Bitcoin coming into the L2?
type model? Yeah.
In the BitVM type model, yes.
Yeah, it depends on the model. Like if you have like what we were talking about earlier, like I guess like kind of the SNARK based kind of like cat based bridge thing, like then the bridge would just like you can only transfer on chain this like wrapped version of Bitcoin that's available in the bridge, right? So if you needed to add more liquidity to the L2, you would need someone like to deposit more money into the bridge, and that can be like yourself. It can be an atomic swap provider.
It would kind of be like arbitrage, because if you're moving in from a centralized exchange to anything, they're usually not minting new wrapped Bitcoin for you. It's kind of like if you're market buying it, and then someone would arbitrage that and say, oh, the price is higher here than the going price for regular Bitcoin. I'm just going to bridge some over myself and, distribute it to AMM pools or whatever. So it's kind of an arbitrage
like market
thing.
making. Yeah,
exactly.
The difference is you're actually changing the ownership of who has the L1 BTC on an L2 in our hypothetical. And with Lightning, the only people that can take the BTC out of Lightning are the people that made the channel.
That makes sense.
The only way to settle the channel is to give it back to who made it. Not give it back to the new owner.
Market making is probably the real way to make money in this situation, not collecting fees.
Well, I think that's also the argument as well, like to be a BitVM like bridge operator. I've like read some like posts, like Galaxy wrote a report on like the financial like opportunity to be an operator and the ability to like facilitate these swaps and facilitate the peg in and peg outs as like a way to like potentially make money. We'll see. Yeah, but with BitVM, like I think what you were mentioning earlier is like you have operators who are like fronting the liquidity for these withdrawals based on like some state in the L2. Yeah, they would have to be able to like, if there was more money coming in, they would have to be able to eventually facilitate that exit with their own liquidity.
Not a small thing.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it depends. But again, like we haven't seen it in practice. So
We'll see what happens.
Yeah, no, I'm
We'll
hesitant.
see.
I'm hesitant. I'm excited this week. Like tonight I have a panel with some BitVM people, and then like there's some events going on. So I'm excited to see.
I think I'm gonna be moderating one of those panels at BitVM night, right?
Yeah, I'll be at BitVM night
Hell
tonight.
yeah! See you guys at BitVM night.
It's gonna be fun. So
Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm excited to see like kind of what the research there is and updates. I haven't really looked at it in a while, to be honest.
Okay, well, this was a good catch-up session, you guys. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Denver. I think we did very well today. A little technically advanced, but we couldn't help ourselves.
I mean, I think the last thing I would say is like this is like very, very like complicated. So if you're building like an activation client or you're building kind of like a covenants proposal, hit me up, and it's a good learning opportunity for me to figure out how these things work, and I'll like write documentation for you pro bono for free. So if you're working on an activation client, I'll spend a couple hours a week to write documentation on it.
Oh my gosh, we didn't even really get to talk about all the new fun things that Bitcoin Layers is doing, but you know what? We'll save that for another episode.
We'll save that
for the next one.
Yeah.
Cool. This is fun.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.